What's up, everybody? Back with another live. I know it's been a minute, but things have been kind of crazy. But this one is long overdue, so I'm going to send my old coach Ali the invite, and then we'll wait. All right, now we wait. Yo,
Yeah, what's good?
what's going on, dude?
Nothing much. How are you
Tired.
doing?
I
I
am
feel that.
tired.
Me too. Me too.
So my current program, I'm squatting and deadlifting like on the same day, 3 days a week.
Oh, that's rough. Is
Yeah,
Chris is writing your stuff right now?
yeah, and he's a
Oh man.
freaking maniac, bro.
Nice.
Yeah. How's
It
everything with
makes
you, bro?
been chilling, same old, same old. I've had actually a issue with my left knee it started with. Now it's coming into my right knee a little bit. But I think that's like a compensation issue that I've actually had for a few months now. Um, so training is kind of like on the back burner. I do like my bare minimum strength stuff, like deadlift 545, and I don't even bother squatting because I can barely put any pressure on it from flexion.
Yeah.
And but that's it. Like doing the bare minimum with deadlift just to keep the strength there because I can still kind of do that. But squats are like pretty much off the table. But I got an appointment with an orthopedist on the 24th next week, so hopefully X-ray and all that, and MRI and whatever. See what happens.
Nice. Yeah, I'm trying to rehab my squat again, which is kind of
Nice.
annoying because, I mean, like, because you had me as like an athlete, but like I
Mm.
would struggle with like the elbow tendonitis from like doing low bar all the time. So Chris was like, all right, well, let's just have you do high bar. And I was like, oh, sure. Oh, yeah, I'm down for that. So now I'm having to like relearn the movement pattern, but it's going a lot better because like thanks to you, I actually understand like how to stack everything properly and how to like sit back
Right.
instead of like yeah, everything being a
And a lot
disaster.
of those things that we worked on too in the past with like bracing and stacking, all that kind of are easier to apply when you're talking about high bar because you have the weight centered over yourself a lot easier. You're not worrying about, well, I'm low bar, I've got to hinge more, or blah, 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 whatever. It's a lot easier to visualize and execute because the bars travel along your center line a little
Yeah,
more evenly. So
yeah,
that should
and
be easier to carry over.
exactly. And the one time that you came over and you were kind of talking to me about like the open scissor concept,
Right.
um, ever since I like figured that out, I'm like, oh, no wonder high bar sucked for me for so long. It's because I was just overarching the entire time, and because it's higher up and I have
Right.
a longer so and I'm more forward, like that's why it sucks so much. So yeah,
Yep.
it's going
And
pretty
a
well.
lot of the tendonitis stuff too is I would argue easier on high bar than it is on low bar because depending on how you shelf your upper rack, the bar should technically just sit on you. If we took your hands away, it wouldn't really matter as long as you're
Yeah.
not moving left front to back like balance wise. So hopefully easier on the elbows too.
Yeah, dude, oh my gosh. I was watching this one video of like this Russian lifter and he was like doing like the Russian dance in between reps like for squat. It's so stupid. It was
Hey man, if
wild.
it works, it works.
Yeah. All right, so it looks like we got oh wow, we got 9 people. All right, I guess you're popular. That's not for me. All right, but let's get into it. So, just introduce yourself a little bit. My first question for you is how long have you been lifting and what got you into it in the first place? And then obviously everybody wants to know how strong you are. So, what are some of your best lifts?
Um, For me, how long have I been lifting? I've been in the weight room since wrestling, so I guess I was probably like 11, which makes it like 13 years. But as far as like treating the gym as a specific sport, like trying to get stronger, bigger, whatever, etc., probably like 11 or 12 years now, maybe like a couple years after that. So that's kind of like my experience path. My best lifts. Man, I know everyone wants to know singles, but I really think I'm better at everything else. So singles, squat was 450, bench was no, no. Sorry.
Love it.
Bench was 315, and deadlift is 605. So those are the single numbers. Um, as far as the rep stuff goes, which are kind of like what I brag on, I've deadlifted 405 for 17. I've squatted 315 for 18, and I've benched 225 for 17. So those are some of my like best rep strength numbers, which
Nice.
I take a lot of pride in, I guess. More so than my singles, to be honest. But yeah,
Yeah, that's something like I feel like everybody is so desensitized to like heavy
right.
singles now, which is
Yeah,
also kind of why I liked working with both you and Chris. And if Chris is still in the chat, huge shout out. He has me crushing like rep PRs like almost weekly. It's pretty
right.
wild, and I think it was cool because like you laid the absolute strength foundation for me when it came to like my one rep max, and then he was like, all right, well now we're gonna do like rep PRs, and then I
Right.
just my endurance that way. So I
Hmm.
think um, something that you guys both share or both have in common is that like you realize that you have to build the foundation for strength first. You can't just do heavy singles all the time and expect to get
Right.
stronger. Like you need to have some kind of volume work um,
Right.
to build everything. So, but that's pretty dope. And like that 605 deadlift, like that's a lot of weight, dude. That's crazy.
Yeah, dude, I'm like 95 pounds away from retirement. I keep telling myself it's been a long like 12 years and like we'll get to 7 and then I'll be done like doing heavy stuff. I'll just lift to be fit and get bigger,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, but still got some stuff to check off. A few boxes.
And I think it's also interesting how long you've been lifting because it's like you're a younger dude, but you have more experience and knowledge than a lot of people who are much older than you. Which is why I
Right.
wanted you to be my coach in the first place. Because I
Hmm.
remember, I tell people this all the time. I just never mention your name, but you're the reason why I got into powerlifting in the first place.
Woo, 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 woo.
I remember it was like after school at FHS, and uh, I think I was doing wrestling that year or something. And for me, like deadlifting, even like 185, uh, was heavy. Like that's when I first started getting into it. And then
Right.
once I was able to build up to like a 315 deadlift, I remember seeing you after school one time pulling in the 400s, and I'm like, there's
Yeah.
no way that this dude is smaller and stronger. Like this makes absolutely no sense. And that's when I became like obsessed with like getting stronger. So it was all thanks to you.
Your boy. Um, yeah,
Yes.
man. Honestly, I feel like a lot of people don't like look back at a specific moment. I don't know. I know I can't look back at a specific moment or person and be like, that's the dude. So like, I mean, hey, good for you that you have like one moment where you know like this was like really changed it for me. I get that question sometimes actually, like not that you're asking, but you know, if you were asking. I do get that question sometimes, like, what do you like? What got you into it in the first place? I don't really know. My older brother always lifted, and then I wrestled in weight room wrestling, but that was it for me. I don't have like a specific moment. I wish I could say though.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty dope. I know. I also remember it was very strange because like I hadn't even been lifting for that long, but people started to respect me a little bit more just because I started to put on some muscle. And you like came
Right,
up to me after school one time and you're like, dude, like a lot of people are giving me crap because they say that like singles or like singular reps don't do anything. And like
right.
now you and I both know that that's stupid because yes it does. But I just
Yeah.
remember like the day I'm like, oh, like he's like asking me my advice. Like I don't even know what I'm doing. But clearly you did because you're getting really strong really fast. Um,
A lot
but
of
yeah,
people did
so
say that. You're right. I mean, I never really thought about it too much, but yeah, a lot of people did mention that, especially because we were both wrestlers and everything, and then it was like about like conditioning work, and obviously when you're on the mat, it's like 3 minutes straight of nonstop. Like, so
yeah,
obviously one rep is not everything, but if your one rep is bigger, let's say I deadlift more than you and I go in for a shot on a double takedown, I'm getting you up and I'm putting you down, you
yeah,
know? So at the end
exactly,
of the day, there is some truth to like absolute strength. You do have to be stronger at
for
some point.
sure. And I think wrestling especially teaches you that because it's all about being either like the biggest in your weight class or like the strongest in your weight class. And I remember like I
Right.
thought I was like I was gonna basically steamroll all these people because I was more jacked than them, and then they would
Right.
just technique me or outstrength me, and I'm like, bro,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
like that in a lot of combat sports. Experience is the king of everything at the end of the day. I remember wrestling, I remember I had to wrestle Hunter because he always wrestled varsity in my weight class and he's been wrestling since he was like 2 years old.
yeah,
And I just faster than I am, smarter than I am, gets around faster than I could ever keep up. By the time I caught up to what he did, he's like 4 steps ahead. So
yeah,
strength's important, but combat sports, man, it's always who's able to think faster and move faster.
Definitely. So moving on to the next question, what types of equipment do you use for lifting, and what kind of got you into them? So I know that there's like suits and sleeves and wraps and stuff like that, but more specifically, I was thinking more like specialty bars or accommodating resistance or like different lift variations. So do you use those or do you incorporate them, and then how do you do that?
Um, I do. I would say I'll start with saying where you can apply specialty bars because I think that's the most important thing, and a lot of people don't really understand that. They get kind of carried away with the specialty stuff. But I would say if you're further away from competing or testing, and I put that in air quotes only because realistically, anytime you're pushing your strength to its absolute, I would consider that like peaking. Regardless if that's like an absolute 3 rep max or a 4 rep max, you have to prep to hit a 4 rep max or 3 rep max, a 5 rep max, a 6 rep max, and an AMRAP, even if it's like how many reps I can do with 405.
Yeah.
You have to prep for those kind of things. And a lot of people get carried away with the specialty bars leading into those. Um, so I will say my personal favorites, definitely a safety squat bar, and more so in the last like year or two, I would say in recent years, specifically Hatfields. I think I really enjoyed Hatfields because they're an easier variation of a squat. I guess the SSB itself, without the rails in front of you, like holding yourself up, um, is good too, and I definitely would use that. But I've enjoyed Hatfields recently because I find it easier to one teach people who have a hard time sitting back, teaches them how to sit back. Two, if they lean too far forward, it can help them by holding the handles and leaning back if they're leaning too far forward. So it really helps teach people that are kind of front to back plane, like how to center themselves well. Um, and it does all that without having to put a huge amount of strain on your hips, knees,
Yeah.
glutes, hamstrings, quads, all the areas that are going to be real sore, real cranky the next day. If you were to do like a regular SSB or a front squat or a regular back squat, you do your whatever the day is 4x8, and then the next day you're fried, and you're like, oh man, I don't know if I can go back to the gym today, or I can't. It might even be 2 days for some people if you have DOMs or something like that.
Yeah.
So in recent years, um, I would say Hatfield on the SSB. As far as accommodating resistance goes, I don't personally use it too much. I don't find too much reason to need to use it. Um, Also, for the majority of people that I've ever worked with, it's always difficult to incorporate because they either one don't have proper equipment to incorporate accommodating resistance, or they're just not far along enough to in their training career to incorporate accommodating resistance. And what I mean by that is it's very difficult to try to incorporate accommodating resistance. Um, and not to say anything against anyone who deadlifts less than 225, but let's just say you only deadlift 225 as your 1 rep max. To try to put accommodating bands, let's just say we're going to do 50 and 50, like 50% on a straight weight and then a 50% accommodating load on heavier sessions. To try to do that, it means you only have one plate in the bar at the bottom, and then you have, your 225 at the top, which is great because it kind of preps your body to get into that. But um, as far as like practical application for making the athlete or lifter better, I don't see the use for it. And then every other time, it just kind of seemed like it was not the right place or time, or they didn't have the right equipment. So accommodating resistance, don't use too frequently. Not to say I'm not a fan. I definitely do like them, especially if you have the right equipment and you're the kind of lifter who's a little bit on the bigger side and lifts a little bit more weight because it is more taxing to try to pull 700 from the floor every single day. So I could see how, maybe 500 with bands that lead up to 650 at the top or 625 at the top would be very useful because you can keep the same intensity without the same amount of fatigue. But accommodating resistance, I just don't apply as often. And for specialty bars, I guess to come back to the question, um, mostly just the SSB, and then I would say maybe a bamboo bar if anyone can ever get their hands on a bamboo bar. I do like the bamboo bar for bench. It's a good way to practice stability on bench, which is a big limiting factor for a lot of people. On squats, you got the people that kind of rock back to front, hips either too far back, too far forward. Um, on bench, you kind of have the same thing with the hands. Like either the hand touch is too low, too high, pressing too fast back when the elbow kind of comes under. Um, but the bamboo bar kind of teaches you how to like stabilize and try to stay in the right position. And it keeps you thinking more and you get the same kind of stimulus because you have to work harder to keep the bar stable and moving. So for me, I would say bamboo bar, SSB, specifically Hatfields if possible. And then accommodating resistance is a yes, but only in the right application and if it's available, which it's usually not, but if it is, then yeah.
Yeah, I definitely love everything that you said. And also, that's another thing that I learned, not so much in our time together, but just like watching how you and Dana and also Gilbert, I see you guys doing Hatfields all the time. So I like read up on it, watched different videos and stuff. And I also find that it's really good for leg hypertrophy without overtaxing your back.
Right,
So for a lifter that I'm currently working with right now, his back is way stronger than his legs, and he pulls conventional. So I'm trying to like help even those things out. So having him do his Hatfields is allowing him to get that leg hypertrophy without overstressing his back and just having him be fried
right,
for squats later on that week. So huge
right.
fan of Hatfields for sure. That's been super dope.
And to
Um,
touch on the Hatfield thing while we're on it, I guess, I would say I think of the Hatfield as a better version of a leg press. Obviously, every tool has its right suit, but for me, a leg press has always been like a knee extender, and you have to load so much weight to try to get a stimulus. Obviously, people are going to argue, well, you're not thinking hard enough if you contract and slow down the motion. Yeah, I get it, but I don't want to do 30-second tempos either, because it doesn't apply to my sport. I would never take 30 seconds to complete a squat rep. If I did, I probably means I missed it. Um, so I like Hatfields because they're kind of like the leg press in the sense where you get that same kind of leg stimulus. But like you said, if you have issues with low back recovery, or in my case, it's always been like a knee issue, or like I'm just training knees on a leg press. It's kind of like a better version of a leg press in that regard.
nice. That's awesome. Yeah, and then the other thing I was going to say is I definitely agree with accommodating resistance, especially when it comes to newer lifters. Not just because of like the whole load thing, but I think something that you were basically saying was like if you're a newer lifter and you can't even stabilize the bar in the first place, adding bands that makes it more unstable or adding chains that makes it more unstable is just going to be a crap show.
Right,
And I've kind of had like both sides happen. So, for example, if I have somebody start out and they're only doing 2 days a week, then yeah, I'm gonna have squat and bench, and then deadlift and overhead press. But if I want them to focus still on their what's it called? If it's just like a lower upper split and I'm focusing on one versus the other, then I'll have them do overhead presses like the main movement, but I'll have them do like speed bench.
right.
Just have them do like 10 sets of three because it's just greasing the groove over and over and over and over. And that really helps with all the mechanics. But
Mhm.
definitely, just like you're saying, like, I feel like it's all dependent on the athlete and if you think that they're able to handle that or not.
Also, on the newer lifter topic that I was kind of trying to talk about without going too crazy in depth. Another reason why I don't really like incorporating accommodating resistance for like I'd probably say beginner to even intermediate, not until like I probably would introduce them until you're more on the advanced side accommodating resistance, is because the majority of lifters, and obviously there are exceptions, but the majority of people from beginner to intermediate will always miss lifts in the area where there is no accommodated load, like the resistance is
Mhm.
not accommodated yet. So if you watch like a deadlift, right? Let's just say we're doing like speed pulls with bands. The majority of people will end up missing their deadlift. And yeah, they'll like let's say they're a conventional puller and they get it like to their knee, but they can't lock it out. The reality is there's a structural issue that got them into that position. So your hips rose really fast and then it was all back and you got it up to your knee and you ran out of steam and then the bar comes back down because you couldn't lock it out. But that ultimately happened because of your lack of control at the bottom of the movement. If you can't control your hips, you don't know how to load your hamstrings, that kind of thing, it doesn't matter how fast you can lock out, okay, well, yeah, great, but I can lock out with, 225 and a 200-pound band. Oh, so I should be able to deadlift 455. Well, that'll never happen if you keep losing your starting position at the bottom because you'll never be in that same spot. So a lot of that, a lot of the reason why I don't also use accommodating resistance for most beginner to intermediates is because they struggle with the control in the compromise position, is what I call it, of a lift, which in the deadlift would be like off the floor, the squat would be out of the hole, and the bench would be off the chest. Obviously, you'll see that kind of shift as you move up the scale of strength and experience in lifting. Like big dudes who bench 500 will always miss like right at lockout because their tricep is the biggest limiting factor for them. Or, maybe it was a misgroove. But either way, they're missing at the top of their lift. So if they can accommodate more resistance at the top of their lift and practice with a heavier load, then they get better in theory. But that's just usually not the case with lifters. It's usually something fundamentally that happens in the compromised position of the lift.
Definitely, definitely. And that's something that I learned both from you and Chris. But like the more time you spend in the stretch or the more like compromised position, the more comfortable you're going to be. So that's
Mm-hmm.
I kind of use like chains, for example, as like a confidence booster because if you can spend more time in the hole, you know what I mean, then you won't be so afraid like if the weight feels heavy. That being said, I completely agree because it's like, okay, well, if you're coming out of the hole and you can't control it, then there's really no point in you having chains in the first place. Like you just need to spend time,
Exactly.
yeah, on controlling your,
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. All right, so my next question for you is what is your approach to peaking and how long do you normally peak your athletes? So I've only really been in a peak working with you and my other coach, Jorge, but I feel like when it came to you, there was way less roadblocks. Like with him, I got COVID, I got injured, blah blah blah. Where for you, we spent a lot of time together, and like I didn't necessarily feel burnt out. Like I was super fatigued. I remember complaining to you about
Yeah.
that, but I never
I
felt
didn't
like
finish my triceps. I didn't do my biceps. My tendonitis.
yeah, exactly. LOL, pause in the whole pause. Uh, but yeah, like when it came to you, like you really helped me understand how to take somebody through a peak, like being through it myself and how everything feels and how your body feels and how it's supposed to adapt to everything versus like, okay, if you need to pull back, blah, blah, blah. So what's your approach and how long do you normally peak your athletes?
So I'm gonna to take the cliche way and say it depends. Obviously, I, if I have to break it up into two categories, right? When you think about peaking, and like we were talking about before, whether you're prepping for a 1 rep max or a 4 rep max or whatever the case is, you're still prepping for that day, and it's a big movement. It's gonna be a big lift. You're gonna be fried after that. You're gonna be like, oh my God, I'm so sore. So regardless what kind of PR we're going for, you kind of prep leading into that, which is how I structure my blocks with you and with most of my athletes that I've ever coached. Um, so I'll say if you're talking about 1 rep maxing, like meat peak kind of deal, I never want to go over 3 months. 3 months just starts to get like kind of watered down. You're calling like if you say like, oh, I'm doing a 16-week peak. Well, it's like really the first 4 weeks you didn't even peak. You're doing sets of like 5, 6, 7, 8. That's not peaking. You're just still stabilizing a foundation of strength. Um, and realistically, most people can't peak for that long of a period of time anyways because you'll be fried by like month 2. And the worst thing that you could ever have is trying to prep for so long and so hard that by the time you're 4 weeks out, you feel like you got ran over by a bus and I can't do another workout ever again because now you still have a whole month ahead of you to make it all polished and perfect. Um, so for 1 rep max meat style stuff, never longer than 12 weeks. If I have the luxury of working with an athlete well in advance prior to that, I would say I like to make it no more than 8 weeks. Anything else, I'd probably just consider that like setting the foundation sort of deal. Like 5 to 10 reps, depending. I would never really go over 10, rarely, unless it's AMRAPs. Um, but I would say 8 weeks if I have the luxury of working with them prior. Um, 12 if I don't. And in the regard of 1 rep versus like a multi-rep set, I guess, like a 4, 5, 6, whatever you're doing. For that kind of a day, I would say probably no more than 6 weeks. Because after the first 4 to 5 weeks, most people get burned out from doing a similar rep scheme. You know what I mean? So if
Yeah.
we have, let's just say we're using DUP and we're periodizing the volume and intensity, etc. And the goal is to do a deadlift set, top set of 4 that we want to hit like a really good number, top set of 4, right? Um, if you spent 4 weeks kind of prepping for that, doing, between 3 and 5 reps on deadlifts, maybe multiple sets of that, maybe some sets with a little bit more just to practice volume and your ability to do reps, then maybe you can do more weeks than 3 to 5. But for the most part, I would say no more than 6, only because at the 4 to 5 range, most people are burnt out. And the last thing you want is like a long deload stretch before you have to go in because you will forget how to do the movement. You'll be like, oh my God, I have to deadlift? How do I do this?
Hmm.
Uh-oh. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's usually what I would say is my approach to peaking, but everybody's different. Some people peak overnight and some people don't.
Yeah, I definitely, for the most part, if I'm trying to like peak people, and again, like it kind of depends on like you're saying, like if it's like an AMRAP thing or if it's like a heavy single, blah blah blah. But normally I find 6 weeks is around a good stretch, just like because of the exact reason you said. I find that people can go hard for that amount of time, but anything more than that, they're just kind of like hitting a brick wall. Um,
Right.
and I think that that's like a good way to introduce heavier loads, but still keep some kind of like volume in there. Because I've
Yep.
had the same thing that you're saying. If people are only doing like heavy singles or a heavy triple, and they're like a newer lifter, that's really not enough volume for them to really understand the movement.
Right.
And like heavy singles, just like you said, are like a skill rather than just like, okay, well, I think I can lift this, I think I have the strength for it. And that's something that I had to take a long time to learn, like
Right.
because I would always and again, like this is something that we talked about before, like outside of this video, but I would always structure it so that we was like, okay, well, I'm gonna do sets of 12 to build a foundation, and then 2 weeks later sets of 10, and then 2 weeks later sets of 8, and then try to like peak it that way. But then by the time I would get to when I was supposed to perform a heavy single, I didn't have the confidence to do it, or I wasn't sure like the strength level for it. So
Right. So
it's
I
all
would that's why I always like to introduce singles. I would be lying if I said I didn't use a linear approach for peaking. Especially like my first time peaking with somebody. The first time, as a general rule of thumb, I like to use a linearized peak, like you were kind of saying, like 12, 10, 8, but like not that far out. I'd probably go like 8, 2 weeks of eights, 2 weeks of sixes, 2 weeks of fours, and then 3, 2, 1, threes, twos, and then maybe like the deload will just be straight up singles, like easier singles. But the month prior, I stopped like I would say 4 to 6 weeks out. If you're prepping for like singles, I would stop worrying about what the weight is for those sets of reps. They become back offs, which is kind of what you saw when we worked together. I care more about the single, so we'll warm up to a top single, take a single, and then do back offs for volume, so that we're still practicing the movement, still keeping our muscles stimulated, so we're not, going into muscle atrophy or whatever. The last thing you want to do is deflate 4 weeks out, and now you have no muscle to move weight because at the end of the day, the muscle moves weight. Um, but you just stop worrying about those numbers. Like for me, like I said, like when you're 6 weeks out, you put the singles in. All we're worried about is making sure that those singles are perfect. Because come the day, like you were saying, we talked about singles are a skill. They're not like you can just wake up in the morning one day and be like, I'm gonna just deadlift 700 because I hit 500 for five, so I can deadlift 700 by this calculator. That's not how it
right.
works. Um, so that's I think the linear thing is fine that you were saying. It's just a matter of knowing when to put singles in and then understanding what your approach is to your training regimen as you get closer to the day that you're gonna perform.
Nice.
Hi, Parth.
Nice. So, my next question is, what are some of your staple movements, and like, what are your favorite mechanically similar movements or exercises you find most helpful for the big three? So, again, you put me on to a lot of different things. So, I remember my freshman year of college when I hit you up for a program. Also, sorry it took so long to give you that $20. I don't know why. You're like, oh yeah, just give
That's
me 20
okay.
bucks, bro. I'm like, yeah, I got you. It was like 3 months later.
It's
Anyway.
all good.
Um, I remember you had me doing overhead press a lot, and I hated
Yep.
it. I was like, "This sucks. This is so difficult." Blah blah blah. And now it's like one of my favorite exercises. So, do you find you still do stuff like that, or now that you've been training for a while, do you tend to be more specified, so on and so forth?
Um, this is a hard question because it has a lot of different angles. It's very complex. For myself and anyone who's been lifting for a long time and is probably decent at like top end singles, fours, threes, like the strength based stuff, um, I would say I probably use variation sparingly. I wouldn't say like I don't include it at all, but like let's say you've been, I don't know, deadlifting competition, powerlifting style. for 10 years. I doubt you need to do any more singles. I doubt I need to tell you to do sets of, 4 to 8 to develop your muscle structure or your movement patterns or really analyze that stuff. Obviously, you still have to do them. It's not like you can't, because it's like riding a bike. Yeah, you'll never forget, but the first time you hop on after 10 years, it's going to be a little rusty. But I definitely don't see a need to drill that stuff in as much. So I'll use, like I was kind of saying before, I'll use movements with like the Hatfield. What I was saying before is I'll use movements like that. You're still getting a squat day, and like maybe we'll have 2 squat days for the experienced lifter. One that's like comp style focused, whether that be like tempo, pauses. It's still your competition bar, your competition stance, competition plate, bar placement, whatever. And then I'll have the second day with like more of a variation on the side of we're just interested in kind of practicing a similar movement. So we have a movement pattern going a little bit, and then also keeping those same muscles stimulated through the week. It's a way to progress without burning you out doing the same movement over and over and over again. Now on the flip side of that, that would be an experienced lifter. On the flip side of that, you have the novice. And the novice, I would do my best to incorporate as much of variation as I can with comp specific things. If I ever coach anybody who's really, really new, I always tell them not to get caught up in wanting to hit, don't make a number like I want to bench 315, because that's going to take a long time, number one, and it's not going to happen like you think it will, obviously. And then number two, the best way to get to that destination is to, one, practice the lift, which takes time, and two, figure out which accessory movements actually apply well for you and your lifting style and type that carry over to your bench. For you, OHP might translate perfectly into your bench. Like if your OHP goes up, if let's say we get to a 250 OHP, right? Then we know your bench went up. And that might be the case for you. But if you take somebody else whose weak point is not really their shoulders, they have no problem pressing through the part of the movement where, you're flaring out and you're relying on your shoulder at the bottom of your front delt, whatever. If they don't have that issue with shoulder strength and OHP doesn't really carry over for them, they do, let's say 2 cycles with OHP, it doesn't carry over, we'll take that off the list and we put something else in. We'll put in a dumbbell press. Now we'll see how a flat dumbbell press works. Maybe if we get the dumbbell press to go up 20 pounds with the same rep scheme in the course of a month or two, then their bench goes up 20 pounds and we're like, okay, this really works. So for a novice lifter, I would always say try as many variations as you can. And I would do that for a novice lifter if they asked me to. Obviously, at the end of the day, the people that choose are the athletes that are doing the workouts themselves. You can't ever make somebody do something, but that's my theory, is that new people should always try as many new movements as they can to see which ones work well for them. And the experienced lifters should be careful which accessory movements they use. And another reason to kind of develop on that idea that I think that way is because if you look at the novice lifter, and this goes all the way up to even intermediate, obviously everyone should be careful with how much accessory work they do. Please don't ever go to the gym and say, I'm going to do 50 sets of every dumbbell, incline, decline, flies. You will never be able to come back. You're going to take a week to recover. So don't ever do that. Don't get carried away. Obviously, you have to be methodical about how you do it, incorporating 1 to 2 per cycle, like per 4-week block or 8-week block or however you want to structure it. But what I was trying to say is, if you look at the experienced lifter, they're obviously lifting more weight. Let's say you bench 405, and then you have somebody who benches 135. Obviously, both people will, go through their comp bench session and still be sore and fatigued the next day. But the reality is the person who benches 405 is probably going to take longer to recover than the person who doesn't. And there's a lot of things that go into that, supplementing PED use, food and nutrition. But ultimately, it takes more to bench 405 than it does to bench 135. And so that same idea applies to everything else that they do. Because if they bench 405, I would assume they could at least, let's just say, flat dumbbell press 150s for reps. That would be like their back offs, or 140s, right? That would kind of be like an average, just guessing any ballpark. Now you take the dude who benches 135, and their dumbbell press is 30s on flats. So now they do the same amount of accessory work reps. They're both doing a 4x8 with flat dumbbell press. But the person who's done 405 for a single and the person who's done 135 for a single now have vastly different volume loads for the week. So obviously, the person who's stronger, more elite, whatever, been doing it longer, is probably going to not need as much stimulus or as many reps or as many exercises as a person who has less stimulus. but that just means that, which is why I'm trying to say like the people at the top have to be careful of like which accessories they choose, much more careful than those that who are just starting out, even up through like the middle range athlete who can kind of experiment a little more and push themselves on the accessories because they're not quite at the point where everything exhausts them, regardless of what movement it is. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that I talk about with a lot of my clients, especially because a lot of them will get like newbie gains and they'll start getting really strong really, really fast. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, like you guys need to understand that once you hit a certain weight threshold, your recovery is going to be even more important because you can't just go through it. And just like you're saying, like hitting 135 for a single is going to be way easier than hitting like 405 for a single.
Right.
And even now, like that's something that I realized, especially when I was working with you, I had to make sure my sleep was perfect, hydration was perfect, eating all the carbs. Like I need to
Yeah.
make sure all those are on point because I was lifting so heavy so often.
Right.
And a lot of people I feel like don't realize that, and that's what blows my mind when I'm seeing like world class lifters. Um, why am I blanking on his name? Andre Malanichev.
Yeah.
Is that who? Yeah,
The
I
animal
remember
guy.
watching
Yeah.
like an interview with him, and he was saying how he would, it was either squat or deadlift. I think it was squat because I'm pretty sure he squat like over 1,000. But he
Hmm.
was saying like he would only squat maybe once every 2 weeks at a certain point because it would take him so long to recover because he's
Right.
moving so much weight. And
Right.
at first I was like, okay, it must be nice, but also like a really good takeaway when you start to train more advanced people. So it's pretty dope.
I guess the other part of that question was, what movement you were asking, like what exercises do I think are like the best or accessory movements?
Just like yeah, what are some of your favorite mechanically similar movements?
I would say RDLs are very high up there. Most people have a really hard time understanding how to hinge, so that's a good way to teach someone how to hinge in a deadlift. Not to mention the benefactor of building your glutes, hamstrings, and low back. So RDLs definitely for deadlifts. For bench, an accessory movement that I find the best, that I like the most, flat dumbbell press or incline dumbbell press. Most people miss bench presses, myself included, right off their chest within that like couple range inch kind of area. Um, and the best way to get better at moving weight fast through that is just having a stronger chest or a bigger chest, because it'll raise your contact point. Um, so definitely a dumbbell press variation for bench, and for squats, I would have to say anything hamstring related. We get so much quad work so regularly, you don't even realize it. Especially in like the beginner to intermediate level, most people are quad dominant anyways. So for if you're talking about squat, anything that's hamstring related, it could be a hamstring curl, hamstring bridging is really good, especially when you're thinking about abduction, like pulling your legs into your center line while bridging with your hamstrings. I like that a lot because it teaches people how to track their knees centered over their foot, without having to think knees out, because I'm not a huge fan of that. Um, so yeah, those are probably my big three. Any hamstring movement for squat, dumbbell press for either incline or flat for bench, and then RDLs for deadlifts in general.
Nice. So, what things have changed for your approach and not just for yourself, like your own training, but also for your athletes over the years? Like, how has your programming, coaching changed, and how has your own training changed?
Um, for myself and for people I coach, I would say the biggest thing I've learned over the years is to be less nuanced. And it sounds kind of silly, uh, but I'd say probably for like the first 8 years of me lifting and like coaching people or whatever, I was very big in the nuanced, like, this is how movement works, and you need to be centered, and you're not hinging, and your hips are rising too early, and your knees aren't far forward enough, and your knees aren't far back enough, and your chin's too high, bring your chin down, like all those kind of things. And they matter, don't get me wrong, they absolutely matter. But at the end of the day, if there's anything I've learned, and as long as I've been lifting, is that you just have to practice doing the movement more. You have to build more muscle, and you have to be more accurate with your out of gym life, your recovery, your sleep, your social life, all that stuff. You have to be very on top of, because like you were saying, even from your experience, and I think most people would agree that that stuff taxes you so much and plays such a big role on how your training goes on that day. And if on that day, let's say you're supposed to squat 405 for 4 and you only hit it for a single and we missed 3 reps, and it was because you were out drinking the night before or something and you're not recovered. Now this sets you back, and for you to be set back when you're so close in like a peak or a prep or whatever on the heavy sets, you don't have that time to be set back. So I would say the biggest things that I've learned over the years is just to look at the big picture more often. Obviously, the small stuff matters. Like if you have a squatter who squats and they fall forward all the time and their chin's down here, I'm going to tell them you need to bring your chin up a little bit because you're falling forward literally, and your head is leading the way for your spine to fall forward. So like little things like that definitely do add up, and they will chip. Like the faster you can fix those things, they chip your weight up little by little. But being overly technical will not help you. I was overly technical for a long time. Like when I first started training, and this is a perfect example. People can look at my training career and see exactly how it happened, right? When I first started training, I didn't care about anything aside from moving more weight, eating more food, and getting bigger. Those are the only 3 things I care about. I didn't care about anything else, right? And that's when you saw me in high school. I went from 115 to 150. I went from deadlifting 200 pounds to deadlifting I want to say 455 probably by the time I graduated high school. So I put 255 pounds on my deadlift just by training really, really hard. And obviously that's newbie gains and whatever, and that kind of happens fast regardless. But then I got really nuanced, and I was kind of stuck in like the mid 4 to high 5 range, just thinking really hard about, oh, well, maybe if I sit back a little more, maybe if I bring my chest up, maybe if I extend my chin, maybe if I brace harder, maybe if I flare my rib cage, or I bring my rib cage down, or I rotate my elbows. All those little like details that end up being important later will hold you back in the intermediate phase because you're thinking too hard about them. Pick a couple things to work on. Don't think about everything at once because you can't do everything at once anyways, which is why when we talked in the past when I was coaching you, I say 2 to 3 cues during a lift and that's it. Like if you have to think about more than 2 to 3 things, there's no way you're thinking about all of them anyways, so you're just wasting your own mental space. But for me, I was stuck thinking about those things for a long time between like a 450 and a 500 deadlift for a long, long time. And then I just stopped thinking about them. I was like, we just got to move more weight more often. We're going to try to chip it every week. If I start feeling tired and fatigued, we'll taper back and then we'll go back to chipping away at it. And sure enough, it went from 500 to 550 and then 550 to 605. It's just sometimes it's not appropriate to think too in detail about all the nuanced things.
Nice. Yeah, and that's also something that I've kind of realized, especially because everybody's built differently. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So it's like just because a certain cue works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for another, or just because a certain form works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for another.
Right.
It's been crazy because like I've had clients that are 4'11", 5 feet tall around there, and then I also have had clients that are like 6'4", and I'm just like, okay, this person is not going to squat and deadlift the same as this person, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
This person's all legs and no torso. This person is all torso and little baby limbs. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely like once you teach them how to move, just try to focus on getting stronger from there. Especially if you
Right.
only have so much time. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
you hyper focus on that. So that's
Right.
pretty cool. Let me see what's next. All right, so who are some of your inspirations, and how has the powerlifting world changed since you first started lifting? So, for me personally, I really didn't start like diving into it until a couple years ago, and that's when I heard about like big names like Ed Cohen, like people like that. But
Mm-hmm.
also like I feel like there's so many like new age lifters like Jamal Browner and people like that. Like yes, they're older per se, but they haven't been around for as long as like let's say like West Side or people from like the 80s, 90s, so on and so forth. So how is
Right.
who are your inspirations, and like how has the powerlifting world changed for you since it started?
Man, I'm gonna sound like a dinosaur because none of my inspirations are any of the new age lifters. I'm not inspired by any of them. I would say if I had to pick a couple people, Dan Green was huge. When I first started training, Dan Green was like the man, and he was inspirational in the sense that he was good at like all 3 lifts. He wasn't like a specialist. He had, 6 pack, big shoulders, just jacked aesthetic. So I would say probably Dan Green. Um, I would say I want to say Captain Kirk. I don't even remember his real name, but I remember distinctly watching like a documentary on like old school lifters like Ed Cohen and all of them, and he was talking about how he's like, man, if I walk in the gym on a Monday morning at 5 a.m. and you're in my squat rack, you got 5 fucking minutes to get out of my squat rack. So like he's like, everybody knew Monday at 5 a.m. That's my squat rack. So he was kind of like a spirit animal for me. I was like, man, that dude is savage. Like, um, so those two, and then Brandon Lilly was a big one, and probably up until now, I would probably still say Brandon Lilly. He grew a lot in the sense like I kind of feel like I grew in the same mental timeline that he did. Like when I first started lifting, I was, a young teenage dude who's just angry about everything all the time. Totally out of control, no method, no purpose, just savage lifting. That's it. That was kind of like Brandon. Oh, that's kind of what Brandon Lilly looked like. Not to say that he didn't have a method, but that's what he looked like from the outside looking in. And then, he had the double knee, I think it was ACL tear or something. He popped both his knees out, and he's just like a changed person. And I kind of reflect with that a lot, where it's like I don't have the same approach to lifting. I still love it. I don't have the same anger and like uh, emotional aggression that I used to have in regards to lifting. Of course, sometimes I feel like I need to act that way to kind of wake myself up and shake myself out of like the midst of being not concentrated. But like I've become okay with not always being 150% in the gym, because if I'm not doing this for a living right now, then I can't. If I've got work, I've got other obligations, I've got family duties, this, that, or the other thing. I can't be killing myself in the gym and being exhausted 24/7. So I know I go through blocks of where I am pushing really hard, like the old days. Sound like an old man. And then times where I'm okay with not giving 110%, but making sure that I'm always showing up to keep myself in check, if that makes sense. So with Brandon Lilly, he's an inspiration to me that probably has aligned with me this entire time, where I felt the way he did when I first started, and I kind of vibe out with how he is now, I guess you could say. But those are probably my big three: Captain Kirk, Dan Green, Brandon Lilly.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like it might be similar for a lot of people, but especially for myself, like when I first started lifting, I loved CT Fletcher. Like I wanted to be like the baddest dude in the room at all times.
Right, right,
Um, and then who else? Dave Tate, I still freaking love. He's like one of the goats. Um,
right.
and then, but like as I've kind of matured, just like you're saying, like in my lifting career, I start to resonate more with people like Matt Wenning, and how he talked about like he left West Side and started to make his own style of powerlifting because he realized like, okay, these dudes are going balls to the wall every single session, and their careers are getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
Right.
Um, and so like that's why I asked you about like specialty bars and stuff like that, because a lot of like variation that he would say like saves your joints, so on and so forth. So I definitely resonate with like the long term now more so than I did before, and just going hard. And even people now like Larry Wheels, I remember watching some of his YouTube videos and he was saying like I don't approach the bar with the same aggression that I did even like a couple of years ago. Now it's way
Yeah,
more calculated and it's about performing, and that's where
right.
I'm starting to take things. And I think that that's a good approach because, yes, like you're saying, the emotion is needed to kind of wake you up a little bit and like get you in the zone. But also, like if you let it take control of you, and that's even something that we talked about in my last squat competition. If you let the
Hmm.
emotion take control of you, then that's when your form and everything starts to falter a little bit.
Exactly. My rule of thumb is if you feel like you need emotion to wake up and get going, always get angry first, then recenter yourself so you're calm, and then approach the bar. Because now you're angry, you've got the adrenaline rushing. Now you've controlled yourself. Your adrenaline's still rushing. It didn't stop rushing yet, but now you're in control of your emotion. And now when you go to approach the bar, you get to do it the same way you always did in training. It's not any different this time because you're angry, which is a big deal for a lot of people. A lot of people miss lifts all the time because of how they feel. And that's how I was when I was younger too, for sure.
Yeah, it's so funny, like watching some of my honestly, even not that long ago, but like I was definitely the douchebag in the gym that was slamming all the weights and screaming at and just trying to be, like I said, the baddest dude in the room. It's like, oh
Yeah.
well, I can lift over 400 pounds, so I'm strong. And it's like, no, you're not, dude. Like, relax. So,
And honestly, like, it's not even just about that kind of stuff. It's also just like you miss less, and when you miss less, you
yeah.
get better over time. Like, it's I don't want to say I have never missed a lift in recent years, but I will say when I first started, I probably was missing like every other week at least once. Like, you know what I mean? If not every week, at least once. And now it's like I couldn't even pin a time where like I missed on a lift that was like my fault. Like where the only time it would be like maybe I'm benching and I clipped the rack and the bar kind of swung out in front of me and someone took it, but that was like honest mistake or I slid out. I didn't have chalk on my back. It wasn't like I was out of control and I couldn't do the lift. But and that sets you up for more long-term success, which a lot of people don't really understand. I think especially when you're new because there's so much emotion and charge into working out. Um, but yeah, keeping yourself centered and true will help you long term for sure.
nice. So this is something that's kind of similar or kind of related. My next question was, how do you keep your love for lifting after all this time? And then, how do you avoid burnout?
Burnout is kind of an easy question for me, which sounds weird, because most people would probably struggle with the idea of burnout. But I've never really felt burnt out from lifting. Um, I've probably only taken like more than a week away from the gym if I was like overseas visiting family, like once every 3 or 4 years. Other than that, I probably wouldn't take more than like 3 to 4 days off the gym. There's just no way. Realistically speaking, my love for lifting originally started um, because of my brother. But what ended up happening was I was so angry that it was my anger release. And then I stopped being angry and I realized it's just a way to just kind of keep me centered and keep me feeling like good about myself, just like moving in general. Um, the best way to avoid burnout, I think, is one, don't set your expectations too high. Two, try to be realistic about how much you can actually do in the gym with your outside life. And three, which goes hand in hand with one, is setting realistic goals if you are pushing yourself in the gym. Um, it's important to realize, and I say if you're pushing yourself in the gym, because it's important to realize if you plan on doing it for a long time, which it's at the end of the day, it's working out, and you should probably try to do it for your entire life because it's good for you, regardless of the strength stuff. And yeah, deadlifting 700 doesn't mean you're healthy, but going to the gym in general and trying to get better in the gym is something that's good for you long term. So everybody should try to do it for their entire life if they can. Um, and the best way to avoid burnout are those three things. And the first thing I think is super duper important, because if you set unrealistic expectations and you're really hard on yourself, you end up getting disappointed. And what happens when you get disappointed is most people um, don't have the mental resilience to push through being disappointed and they end up giving up. So if you're too hard on yourself, or like one and three go hand in hand, you go too hard on yourself or you set your expectation too high, both of those which inherently set you up for failure because you'll go in the gym and say, I'm going to deadlift 500 for 5 reps today. You go in and I'm saying unrealistic expectation because maybe your best deadlift was like 460 for 5, and you're not even peaked or prepped for a top set of 5. And now you think you're going to go in and put 40 pounds on your last PR. You're not going to do that. That doesn't happen overnight without the right prep. So if you go in and you tell yourself that, and then you put 500 on the bar, and you hit 2 reps, and then you throw your back out on the third, the odds of you coming back next week or next month or ever, it's like go down, and that continues to go down over time because your EO gets crushed. So just be realistic. Understand that at the end of the day, if you do take it that seriously, that it is a sport. A lot of people forget that it is a sport just because it's lifting weights and everybody can lift weights and blah 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 blah. It is a sport, especially if you're trying to perform at the highest level that your body can possibly perform at. And even the best athletes in the world have really, really shitty days. I mean, you can watch the NFL, MLB, any sport like that you like to watch, soccer, baseball, basketball, it doesn't matter. Any athlete will have a really, really shitty day. And at the end of the day, the difference between them and the people who get demoralized in the gym is that they know they had a shitty day and they know they're going to come back and make it better next time. And they're going to analyze what they did wrong, and they're going to come back tomorrow or the next week or whatever when they're done resting, recovering, and prepping, and they're going to attack what they did wrong with the right mindset. People don't have the right mindset to come back and correct things they did wrong. and they come in with unrealistic expectations. You would never expect, a 13-year-old boys basketball team to beat someone in, a professional league. It's not going to happen. Those dudes are like 2 feet shorter than everybody else. They won't even get a shot off if everybody was taking the game seriously. But for some reason, everyone treats it differently in powerlifting and like weightlifting in general. They think that like if I deadlifted 315, and it's like this whole meme, like I deadlift 315 conventional, so I could deadlift 600 sumo. Like, no, you can't. Like, that's not how it works. But yeah, that's how you avoid burnout, I would say. Just be realistic, have fun. Remember, it is a sport if you are taking it seriously. Um, and just be intermittent. Keep it interesting for yourself. As far as my love for lifting, I love lifting because probably the same reason anyone loves any other sport. You always learn something new. And the nice thing about lifting is you're never too old to be the best for yourself. Um, let's say I hit my prime, I'm 24 now. Let's say I hit my prime at 29, and after that, it's all downhill, right? Let's just say that's the case, which is probably not, but let's say it is. At the end of the day, you can always get better at something and set a PR for yourself for that current body you have, that 30-year-old, that 40-year-old body, that 50-year-old body. If we keep powerlifting until 70, right? You will not deadlift 600 at 70. I mean, you might, but like realistically, you probably won't deadlift 600 at 70, but you can still come into the gym and hit a couple reps with a plate or 2 plates or whatever. You never know. But the nice thing about lifting that no other sport has is you can always get better and always learn something new every single time you're in the session, no matter how old or how young. So for me, I maintain my love by knowing every time I go in the gym, I'm going to get better at something. And it could be like something really stupid, like maybe deadlifts and bench went horribly and I felt like trash. But I did a new tricep variation with, underhand on the rope as opposed to an overhand. And I got a really sick pump without having to use a lot of weight. I'll be like, oh my God, that's how I get my pump from now on. Like I'm doing that forever. And then it goes in cycles. There'll come a point in time where like that movement, same movement doesn't give you the same pump anymore. And you got to switch it up. But always make sure that when you're walking in the gym, you're walking in with the mindset that I just need to get a little bit better at something, anything at all. And that'll maintain your love for the sport because you'll realize I can still get better even if I'm not at my peak. This might not be my peak, but I'm still getting better today. The harder you are on yourself, it's hard to love something that causes you anger and pain. You would never be in a relationship if you were pissed all the time, right? Like, you wouldn't be like, oh, I love her so much, but I'm angry all the time. I just hate it so much. Same thing with lifting or any sport. You would never participate in your sport if it made you angry all the time. So make yourself happy in the gym. And as long as you're in there getting better, you'll make yourself happy and you'll keep going. And you'll never get burnt out.
Definitely. And I think something that I've noticed with a lot of the newer age powerlifters, because they're like obviously the genetic pool is getting bigger because it's becoming more popular. You're seeing more
Right.
and more genetic freaks. You're seeing more people have insane like squat bench deadlifts that are just starting out. And something that I've seen with like a lot of people, honestly, even in like the area, is as soon as they hit a wall or let's say like an injury or something like that, that's it. My
On.
career's over. I'm not gonna hit an 800-pound deadlift anymore by the time I'm 29. Like that's it, dude. Like I'm over it.
Yeah. They
And
just
it's like,
disappear. Just as
yeah,
fast as they came, they're gone.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And it's like, dude, like relax. This is your first injury. This is your first time, whatever, going through something. You need to realize that you want to be lifting for the rest of your life, right? They're like, yeah. And it's like, okay, like just calm down and take a second. And I like, honestly, I've been kind of guilty of that too, but not to that extent. Like I understand the frustrations of like an injury or a setback because then it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to reach the goal that I thought I was going to hit by this timeline. But then I realized, just like you're saying, like I get over it because it's like, okay, well, it may not happen right now, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to happen later.
Right.
And I think that that's something that I'm still kind of getting through a little bit because I love to work hard, and having coaches makes me want to work even harder. You know what I mean? But I
Right.
can't always push, just like you're saying, I can't push 150% all the time. So
Yeah.
now I'm starting to like, okay, well, uh, if I want to, let's say, have like a 6 plate deadlift, I don't care if it happens within a couple months or if it happens in like a year or two, because like I'm okay with taking my time and building that foundation with it. So I definitely
Right.
think, just like you're saying, realistic expectations and not putting such a tight timeline on things will definitely help you avoid the burnout.
Hmm.
So my last question for you is, what are some of your personal business and fitness goals for 2022? So I saw you recently joined, I'm blanking on his name, but
Team Villain, Adrian.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
You recently joined that team. So like, what are some of your goals for your business and also like your own fitness goals?
Um, Business wise, I would like to reestablish an actual roster with coaching athletes, and I would like to have a span of everything from beginner to expert. I feel like I enjoy being challenged by different walks of life. I'm not the type of person that really likes to cherry pick people. The only thing that I do like in an athlete, I guess, is someone who's coachable, someone who actually will hear what I'm saying and think about it. But I would love to just build a roster that spans everything from first day deadlifting to I've been deadlifting for 25 years. That would be really cool for me. Um, and just kind of getting back into the coaching scene in general, because I haven't really coached too many people aside from like you, really, and probably like a year or two, probably since like a little after COVID. Um, so just kind of reestablishing a team, and hopefully a team that's well-rounded in the sense of everything from novice to expert. Um, that would be, I guess, my business goal, you could say. As far as my own fitness goal, and see, this is how I avoid burnout. I don't make goals. I just kind of let it ride. No, I think my only current fitness goal was probably, well, not to lie. Okay, I do have fitness goals. Okay. Um, 315 on bench for a triple, and then I can never bench again. I'll retire from benching. Once I do that, we'll be done. Um, and then once I figure out what's going on with my knee, probably just getting back to squatting and taking deadlifts seriously. I don't want to really put a number on it just because I don't like setting unrealistic expectations. For all I know, it could be like a torn meniscus. It could just be like the doctor's like, "Hey, you're a little fat, lose some weight." And I'll be like, "All right, dude, simple fix." But it depends on, I guess, on the complexity of what's going on with my left knee right now. Um, so probably just bench 315 for three is my only like fitness related goal for myself. Yeah.
Nice. Very gym bro-esque. I love it.
Yep. I never thought I would make a goal only for benching, like the only lift that I like couldn't ever care less about for myself. But now it's like the only thing I can really do pain free, kind of. So that's all I got.
Nice, dude. All right, well, that's all my questions for today. I really appreciate you doing this. There was lots and lots and lots of gems dropped during this talk. So again, I appreciate all that.
Of
If you
course.
guys don't already, please follow Ali. If you're interested in a powerlifting coach, please hit him up. He is one of the best, especially in the area. The dude's a freaking genius. So thanks again for everything, and
Thank you.
hopefully I will talk to you again sometime soon.
Peace.
See you.